Good evening, everybody. We are excited to have you here this evening. We have got quite the conversation to go into this evening, folks. We've been waiting for this day for a couple weeks. Today, we are going to get to interview Adam Miller. Welcome in from everybody on Discord, everybody on Facebook and Clapper. Welcome in. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Corey Fico and Mr. Adam Miller. Welcome to the table, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's nice to meet everybody.
All right. We are excited to have you. For everybody who doesn't know, Adam Miller was previously the founder of DAO Platforms IO, providing strategies, technology, consulting to help others launch and operate in DAOs. Adam spent 6 years in engineering technology research at Capital Group. It's a global investment management firm with over $2 trillion in assets. Adam started his career investing and founding several social web platforms, including Study Abroad 101. He has a BS in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and certificate of cybersecurity from UC Irvine, and a cryptocurrencies from MIT Media Lab. That's a lot to spit out, Adam.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, we welcome you in. Corey, welcome in.
Yeah.
And Adam, we've got so many questions tonight. So many
All right.
questions. So off the jump, Adam, would you like to go into a little bit of high-level DAO explanation, introduce yourself to the people in here, and let us hear a little bit about you?
Yeah, that sounds great. So again, I'm Adam Miller. It's really great to be here. It's really nice to meet all of you. I first discovered crypto in 2012 with Bitcoin, and luckily I convinced some friends and family to buy some. And that's my claim to fame in my social group. And over the years, I followed what was happening with crypto just as a hobby until about a year and a half ago, when I finally saw the crypto light, thanks to experimenting a bit with dApps on Ethereum and DeFi, and just finally realizing that this wasn't just currencies, that this was a technology platform that will be bigger than the internet, or at least it will transform the internet into something new and different and even more valuable. And it was about 6 months ago that I found DAOs. I mean, I had been aware of the DAO several years ago, and aware of the concept of DAOs and how they could change everything. But it was about 6 months ago that I felt like the technology was finally there to make it relatively easy for anyone to start a DAO, at least anyone who's comfortable with crypto and willing to do a bit of experimentation and troubleshooting. You can spin up a treasury or a Gnosis safe. You can do on or off chain voting. You can do Discord integrations. And so suddenly, several months ago, it was possible to start DAOs. And at the same time, I saw how difficult it was. And that's what inspired me to start my DAO consulting company called DAOplatform.io, which I'm now in the process of handing over to a DAO. So it's going to be a DAO of DAO consultants called DAO Ninjas. And while I was working on that, an old friend of mine who I had started a business with before, named Mark Lurie, so he's the CEO of Shipyard Software, which built Clipper, which is a DEX. It's the DEX, a decentralized exchange. It's the DEX that has the best prices for trades under $10,000. So it's really focused on not the whales, but the minnows or all the other fish in the sea. And Mark had wanted to create a legal entity for the DAO that was going to take over governing the DEX. And what he quickly found was that there really were no options out there that truly respected the nature of a DAO. You had to kind of finagle a traditional world legal entity solution around a DAO and take shortcuts that we can go into on this call to make it work, and essentially make sacrifices that DAOs shouldn't have to make. And so he had relationships in the Marshall Islands, and he worked. That's when he brought me on board and said, "Hey, maybe we can do something in the Marshall Islands. Let's create a new legal entity that is tailor-made for DAOs." So we went to the Marshall Islands. We had conversations with the folks in the government there and worked on a new law that updated their LLC statute to create this new type of LLC, which is effectively, we're calling it a DAO LLC, but really it's just an LLC that, for reasons, again, that we could get into, is great for DAOs. So now, DAOs can be legal entities, and we started this company called MyDAO, MIDAO, .org, or MyDAODS for directory services on Twitter, that is helping people and helping DAOs become LLCs in the Marshall Islands. So that's how I got from buying a few Bitcoin in 2012 to running MyDAO here 10 years later.
Yeah, awesome. That is awesome. So, Corey, do you have a question that you want to start off with? I know you had a few questions lined
my
up.
goodness.
Why don't you jump into one?
Yeah, I would say that I have a list of questions that could fill, 10-point font, an entire book for you, Adam. First and foremost, quite a journey. Happy that you have taken it, and like most things, you kind of have to start where you did to end up where you're at. Let's start with the most obvious question. For those who are somewhat familiar with the DAO, why in the world does it even matter whether or not it's incorporated? Like, who cares?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we could get into like what a DAO really is, but I think everyone would probably agree that what makes DAOs relevant is that they're groups of people doing something together. And that's not all they are. That's not enough to be a DAO, but they do involve groups of people doing something together. And when a group of people decides to go do something together in the real world, in the world that we live in, the meat space, physical world, the government automatically starts making certain interpretations, such as, for example, a group of people doing something together is considered a partnership. And a partnership is a particular type of company that has a particular treatment according to the law. And in particular, what happens with a partnership is all of the people involved in that endeavor, whatever it is, can be held legally liable for the actions of the group. Or, in other words, the actions of the other people in the group. And so if someone in the group is, let's say, hosting an event, and someone at the event, because of negligence on that person's behalf, falls and trips and hurts themselves, and they want to sue the organization that was hosting the party, they can come after you, even if you weren't the one hosting the event, because your partnership, right, your group of people hosted the event. And so they can come after you, and that's called unlimited liability. And any group of people that gets together and tries to do something together, right, has that issue of unlimited liability. Just to give one other example, let's say that group of people gets together and launches a token and does a token sale. And later on, and we're getting pretty deep pretty fast in what happens in crypto, but let's say you do a token sale and the SEC says, wait a second, like, you didn't follow securities regulations with this token sale. We want millions of dollars back that you have to give back to your investors, and $1 million fee. Everyone in that organization, yourself included, can be held liable for the action of that token sale. So that's unlimited liability. And so what legal entities do for you, whether it's an LLC or any type of corporation or a foundation or certain types of associations, right, these are all legal concepts that by taking one on, you can protect yourself and grant yourself what's called limited liability, which is to say it's only the company, right, the corporation or the LLC, or if a DAO forms one of these entities, the DAO itself that can be held liable, not the individual members. So that's the first thing. And there's one other thing. The other reason that DAOs, and again, really any group of people that's doing something together, should consider forming some kind of legal entity is called corporate personhood. So corporate personhood is the idea that your company or your DAO, or again, whatever you want to call it, can be treated like a person in the eyes of the law in the sense that it can enter into agreements with people. And those agreements could be signing a contract, right? So if your group of people, whatever you're working on, if you want to sign a contract as a group with, say, someone that is going to do some work for you, or you're buying some kind of service, right? Or you're signing up for a bank account and you're signing an agreement, or you're buying a piece of real estate. Like, all of these things require you to enter into an agreement with someone. And a group of people that's just loosely organized can't do that. If they sign that document, they're signing it for themselves. And so if you want that group of people to be able to act as a person, like act together in agreeing to anything with others, you have to have some kind of legal entity. And so that corporate personhood allows the DAO, or again, whatever type of organization you are, to do things like open bank accounts, hire people, pay taxes if you so choose, or if you have to own real estate, right, or own intellectual property. Right. Today, DAOs that are organized, and maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves here, but DAOs that are organized and producing a bunch of content together, and they have a logo and they have a brand and they've created podcasts. If there's no legal entity, then the people who made that logo own the logo, not the DAO. Or the people who created the podcast own the podcast, not the DAO. And there's a lot of gray area. And at the end of the day, this only matters if you end up in court. And when you get to court, you can argue about all this stuff. But the fact is, if you have that corporate personhood, if you form a legal entity for your DAO or for your organization, then it can become very clear, like that, like this logo is the company's logo, right? It's the DAO's logo. It's not the individual who made it. This podcast is the DAO's podcast, and everyone, will respect that. So, two things: one is limited liability, two is corporate personhood.
So,
Interesting.
Phil, if I might jump into this real fast,
yeah,
and then
go
I'm going
ahead.
to hand it back over to you, because first and foremost, Adam, you did not dive too deep too fast. That's what this podcast is about. We get very deep, very fast. This is beautiful, and we're only going to keep going from here. So just keep on this pace. This is absolutely glorious. And
Awesome.
yes, yeah, beautiful. And it's going to be recorded for everybody who's listening here. If it is a lot to take in, because you're going to be drinking from the fire hose and you're trying to separate out the different bits and parts, good news is you can record it. Because it's recorded, you can replay it. And in that way, Phil, he and I talked. I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to be the sand in between the rocks here, Adam. So what I'm going to do, because I've got a list of like 1,000 questions, and so we created a preformed list, and Phil will kind of jump through that, and then to keep like the eager, excited child on the sidelines at bay here, he's going to hand it over to me for appropriate segues.
Yeah, nice. So a follow-up question I have, Adam, is that what specifically do you see that the Marshall Islands did, and how are they viewing this different than other nations are viewing it?
Yeah, great question. So what the Marshall Islands did is really three things. One is it made it so that in an LLC, a limited liability company, which is decades old, right? There's limited liability companies all over the place. They made it so that a limited liability company can have its membership tracked in a smart contract on the blockchain. So traditionally, if you have an LLC, what you'd probably be required to do is keep a list of the members on a piece of paper called the operating agreement, and maybe called different things in different jurisdictions. And if your membership changes, you have to document the change. You have to update the operating agreement to actually add the new person and probably their physical address, maybe their phone number to the list. And then now that person is a member. So you can imagine with a DAO where there's maybe thousands of people who are members, and every day new people are joining and leaving, there's just no way you could do that. And so what the Marshall Islands did is they made it so that you can literally reference a smart contract and say, on the Ethereum blockchain, or on this blockchain at this address is a smart contract that contains a list of addresses that are token holders, for example, of a certain token. And by holding that token, a person is made a member of this organization. And so as a result, right, someone buys the token. And again, you could do it with NFTs, you could do it with whatever type of governance contract or ERC20 or whatever kind of contract you want. When someone buys the token, they're a member of the DAO. And you could put in, the token in the smart contract and or in your Discord. You could say, like, look, by buying a token, you're agreeing to X, Y, and Z, being a part of this organization. Maybe any work you do for the organization is intellectual property is owned by the organization. If you want to do all that, you can. So it's membership being tracked on the blockchain. 2 is governance can be defined and tracked on the blockchain. And so, again, traditionally in an LLC, what you have to do is you have to describe in English or whatever your local language is, how decisions are made by the organization. So you might say something like, of the 9 members of the organization, any decision with respect to the organization requires a quorum of 7 people and a majority of the people voting. And maybe you say the voting has to take place in person, or maybe you say by email is okay, and requires a majority of people to approve something for it to take into effect. And so what that really means is, day to day, no one's looking at the operating agreement and saying, wait, how do we make this decision, right? Usually everyone's in agreement. But let's say that there's a vote, not to spend a bunch of money on something. And then one of the members goes and uses one of the company's checks and spends a bunch of money on something. Well, the other members might want to take you to court, and they might want to go to court and say, hey, look, the bylaws, our operating agreement says it requires a majority vote for us to do something. We voted against this action and the person took it anyways. So we're coming after them for this money, right? And the court would see that and say, okay, well, the operating agreement says that, and clearly you all voted a certain way. And so this person broke the law by moving in a different direction. The new, yeah.
Adam, sorry to interject because that's beautiful, and I want you to continue.
Sure.
In the podcast here, the chat, by the way, anybody who's not in the podcast chat, you need to jump into this. You just answered a couple different questions that were in the podcast chat. So one of them was, how is the equation of corporate personhood and decentralization, like how do you combine them whenever they seem like they're poles worlds apart? And the other one, thinking about like corporate personhood and also to the bylaws and all that. It really, what it does to me, and please redirect me if I'm wrong, is you ensure that it's decentralized and by and for the people and truly a DAO by giving both the limited liability that all the members would need in order to be able to operate independently, but also the protection mechanisms for people to actually reinforce the smart contracts whenever there's a weak point in a DAO, because let's be real, no matter how close you are to full decentralization, there still are people along that chain. The rest of the community now has recourse, which to me would mean that it's the most decentralized it could possibly be, is that the community can make sure members not acting in accordance with the rules are beholden to those rules. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way we think about DAOs, like a DAO is a thing, right? That in a sense that makes it centralized, I suppose, in that it's one thing. Like think of it as like one big circle. But yeah, exactly. I mean, what this law does is it allows you to say in the operating agreement, the smart contract at this blockchain at this address makes the decisions for this organization, right? And you'd say it in a few more words, but exactly what you said. If the smart contract takes majority voting with a quorum of 20% of all of the token holders of some token, and that group of people votes a certain way and it's recorded on the blockchain. Now, if you end up in court one day over a dispute, the judge, the jury, they're going to have to actually bring in a witness who's going to look at the blockchain and say, yeah, this DAO said that they were not going to spend this money this way from their bank account, let's say, if you have a bank account, and yet, the person who holds the checkbook did it. And so now you can actually hold everyone involved in the organization accountable to actually do what is voted on by the community in whatever type of smart contract or blockchain-based governance system you're using.
So I could continue on, but Phil, I'm going to have to.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey. No, do a follow-up with that.
Well, so on that, as initiators of this DAO, we wouldn't like to even label ourselves as owners any more than anyone else who holds the DOI coin is an owner. Our fear is, as things move on, like any DAO, is that it can be corrupted, because anytime, especially for something as big in scope and vision as our organization is, there comes in players who might use it for their own interests, and we have to recognize that no matter what we do, there's going to be a certain portion of that. But by giving mechanisms to actually enforce control at the weak links of the DAO, as technology catches up to the ability to fill in those holes in the fence, to me, that's just utterly brilliant. And it also makes me question how, comparatively speaking, if one is given the choice to be a DAO under these kinds of guidelines, or to be a DAO in theory, but without any reinforcement in a legal sense to be able to beholden the leaders of that DAO or the people that facilitate the transfer of funds, it makes me wonder how they could even call themselves a DAO. But maybe I'm just going 4 steps ahead. I know we are kind of on the cutting edge here.
Yeah, and I think, look, most DAOs, I've seen a lot of DAOs, and it's really awesome getting to meet so many people that are involved in and starting DAOs. Most DAOs are on the path to decentralization, right? And maybe that's even become a bit of a turn of phrase that even carries maybe more or less weight just because people use it so much. But the vision for a DAO is that if you wanted to, you could put all of the power directly in the hands of the membership, right? Vote on everything, control the treasury directly with your votes. No multi-sig, no board, no management, and that's the direction that everyone's kind of going. But most people are not there yet, and honestly, I don't know if most people are ever going to get there. I think for most, organizations, yeah, there's this whole new world of possibility, but you have to decide for yourself, what makes the most sense for your community, for the mission and vision that you're trying to achieve. If you have investors, your investors, right? What is it that that works for you? And if that means you want to put all the power in the hands of the members, and know that, and you could try to put safeguards in place, in creative ways, but, knowing that if a majority of the people or a majority of the token holders vote in a way that you can't even fathom they should, that you're still going to go in that direction, then that's like all the way DAO, right? That's all the way decentralized. But yeah, what I'm seeing today, most DAOs have a multi-sig with 5 people or 9 people, and they're maybe doing voting on Signal, but those votes are not legally binding. So if the multi-sig holders, really want to veto, they can. And sometimes that's unspoken, sometimes that's acknowledged explicitly. And in most cases, there is no legal framework for handling a dispute. If you hold one of the multi-sig, the keys to the multi-sig, you're in charge. So that's what I would say, is that, everyone's on this path to decentralization, but realistically, most people are somewhere in the middle, or even maybe still pretty far from decentralization, but everyone has that shared vision that maybe we want to go fully decentralized now or one day.
Yeah, interesting. Something that I've wondered with that is that as we see this happening around us with the DAOs, how do you see the path for companies to bring in partial DAOs into their structure? Like maybe they're able to use a DAO to maybe govern how they do healthcare amongst all of their employees, where they're able to say, well, we're going to turn this part of our company into a DAO, taking the responsibility out of the company's hands and putting that into the employees' hands. Do you see something like that happening, or it's going to have to be a mixture, right? Where they are starting to decentralize on their way there, so they'll just have certain elements.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people are combining multiple legal entities and or multiple kind of just organization types, if we don't want to look at legal in a legal sense. And just like you said, you may have let's say you have a for-profit traditional LLC based in Delaware that owns a bunch of land and has a brand and is building, let's say, a university in the metaverse, is one example that some people actually are doing, but this really is a hypothetical. And they want there to be a DAO that kind of manages the curriculum of the university and maybe manages who gets to use the land and for what, and what buildings get built, and who the professors are. And maybe they have a budget, maybe they're even selling tokens to raise money, and all of that can happen in the DAO, but you could have the actual real estate and the brand and certain other things still reside in that original entity without giving it to the DAO. So I do see a lot of people are taking that kind of approach where you're combining what's usually more of like a for-profit entity with maybe a DAO that may or may not be for-profit, that is really being used for engaging the community and making certain decisions related to the organization.
Yeah, interesting. So Corey, do you have a follow up along that line?
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about partial to full decentralization, and ultimately where, at the end of the day, where the idea of a DAO meets the actual implementation of a DAO in the physical world, I can't help but to ask the obvious question that, at least obvious to me, is what does that look like? So where the two meet each other, that we mentioned having a smart contract come in, and Marshall Islands will recognize that and provide it, the legal person status, and give it legal liability. What does that process look like? Is there like a specific format? Does it need to be structured a certain way? Can it be on any blockchain? Does it need to be on a specific blockchain? Does it need to go through a specific channel? Like, does it need to start at path A and then go through how the contract is written? Are there any guidelines for how that smart contract can be written or can't be written? Like, what does it actually look like in practicality? So to make an example, let's say that you have a metaverse university, and you wanted to make what types of courses that you bring forth on the DAO. Let's just say you want to do the whole thing, and you want to, token holders are the owners, they're the stakeholders, they also get dividends returns. What do they do next? So they go, okay, we want to legally incorporate this in the Marshall Islands. Now what?
Yeah, so it's much easier to form a legal entity very early in developing any organization rather than later on. So that means maybe it's just literally one person and a plan, or a group of 3, 5, 7, or 9 people and a plan. They're the ones who should, as soon as possible, form the legal entity, and it'll be very simple up front, right? It will just say, these 7 people listed on Exhibit A are the members, and any decision governing the organization requires a majority vote, right? Form your legal entity, then you get legal liability protection from the beginning when you create tokens, when you take other actions. And the other thing is that, let's say you create the legal entity later on. So you already have a bunch of land in the metaverse, you have a bunch of crypto that is in your treasury because people have bought tokens. Now you form your legal entity. That entity doesn't get to retroactively own all of those assets from the beginning of the project. You have to give those assets to the entity. So the group of people that's holding a treasury, let's say it has millions of dollars worth of like virtual land NFTs, other NFTs, and crypto in it. When you give it to the LLC, to the legal entity, that can be a taxable event for you, because if those assets gained value while you held them before you had a legal entity, and now you're going to give them away to the legal entity, you'll have to pay capital gains taxes, or whatever the taxes might look like in your jurisdiction, as if you were selling those assets, because that's basically what you're doing. You're giving them away. So that can make it very complicated for organizations that don't have a legal entity from the beginning to create one later on. And it often means, consulting at least a lawyer, maybe a tax lawyer, to make sure you do it in, the best way that you can. So in a perfect world, what this looks like, to really answer your question, is a small group of people come to us or whoever and form their legal entity, and then they start building the DAO. And when you want to turn over control and membership of the organization to a larger group of people or a smart contract, then it's very easy to change your operating agreement, basically change the rules and say, well, now, decisions are made by this smart contract or by the people, holding this token. So
see.
I hope that's, yeah, it may not be the answer you were looking for, but hopefully that's
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah, absolutely. So much like in the standard traditional legal framework, you would just update your operating agreements and make sure that whatever legal entity that governs you, depending on what part of the country that you're in or world, that you would update it with that organization, with that governance. So in this same way, you can set on the ground floor, ideally. It's not impossible. There are workarounds, there are things to do later on in the process for those who want to go full DAO, who haven't done so now. But that's a much more complicated conversation, it sounds. But those who can and want to, they can get in on the ground floor, set this up simply, and then as they adapt, as they change, as their technology, as the technology evolves and they're able to become more and more DAO-like, more and more decentralized, as they implement new things, get new resources, then you just update the operating agreement. Am I correct in all this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. Yep.
So what does that look like from, just to ask the next obvious question, what does that look like from a resources expenditure? I mean, what is that? I know, granted, every situation's different, but are we talking $50, $500, $500,000? Like, because at the end of the day, for everyone involved, and once again, I know you can't give a cookie cutter answer, and I'm okay if you kick this one back, but for those who understand that they should be doing this from the start, at least that initial conversation, the initial setup, and then obviously there'll be follow-on work, there'll be follow-on payments that they have to make in order to upkeep and adapt the DAO. But to kick it off, is that something that every DAO can afford to do, or is that something where you kind of need to be well invested into?
So, first I will answer the question. You remind me, I should have said this is not legal advice. And I know everyone in crypto loves their disclaimers, and this is also not financial or tax advice. It's really not legal advice, and I'm not a lawyer. So, I don't give legal advice. We do have lawyers on the team, and obviously the way we run our business is consistent with, legal practices. But so, um, uh, oh boy, I got lost in my disclaimer and I almost lost track of your question. Give me 1 second. Can you remind me where we're going?
Yeah,
Just brief.
it's all good. It's all good. We get deep. We get deep fast. The question is kind of
Hey, we get lost every evening.
right.
Thank you.
So the question is what does it take to get into this? Is this something that everyone
yeah.
can do, or is kind of where's the bar for entry?
Okay. So if you were starting a regular corporation that had nothing to do with DAOs and didn't involve blockchain, you could either go to LegalZoom or the company corporation or some other website, and for probably $200, you set up your corporation. They're going to give you a bunch of documents that are templates. You can make whatever changes to them that you want, or you can just use the templates as they are. They're going to tell you, sign these papers, file this, have a meeting. And for a couple $100, you have your corporation. And when you want to make changes later on, they'll tell you, well, here's our other templates if you want to use these templates. And it's not going to cost you anything to change your bylaws or your operating agreement or whatever it is, or file something with the government. That's one approach. The opposite approach is hire lawyers that you're going to have to pay, $400, $500 an hour, whatever it is, to do all that stuff for you. And now instead of $200, it's going to cost you $100,000. And the approach that makes sense for you is going to depend a lot on how much money you have available, and therefore how much it's worth to you to manage risk and hire lawyers who can think about every last detail versus just using LegalZoom's, a $200, I don't know exactly how much it is, but their $200 solution. So what MyDAO is doing, our company, we're a bit more on the side, on the LegalZoom side. So we're a registered agent. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for business people to understand what's available in the Marshall Islands and leverage it to create their LLCs. So we're going to give you templates. We'll give you advice on the phone, right? And tell you, not legal advice, we'll give you advice and say, here's what we see other people doing. Here's some documents you may want to use. And if you're comfortable with that, it's not going to cost you anything to change your operating agreement, right? Just get some advice from us, make some changes to the agreement. You can run it by me. I'll check it out. I'll tell you what I think. And then, you sign it and you go with it. Versus, in another situation, you might want to have your lawyers you might want to go through multiple revisions, and you might want to spend a bunch of money on it. So it really is up to you, and it depends on the situation that you're in, what you want to go through when you're both creating the entity and making changes to it.
So, Phil, do you mind if I add
Yeah,
one more
no,
follow-up
no.
question to
Jump
that?
in.
So, to that, Adam, what we envision, and granted, this is one vision of many potential futures, but what we envision is a future where DAOs are adopted at an exponentially increasing rate. And in order to do that, in order to tokenize real world physical projects, in order to decentralize and to build communities that are empowered, that vote, that own the things that they're engaged in, they have to start somewhere, especially somewhere prior to, based off of what you said before, once again, not legal advice, but it seems like it would be very mindful, it'd be very thoughtful of someone to take the time to incorporate themselves in the Marshall Islands to work with you or whomever, which right now it seems like it's just you globally, as far as I know, but to start off small before they even raise any capital, whether that's raise capital from community members across the globe at 0.1 BNB a person, or whether it's through big investment firms at millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars at a pop. It seems to me like the path would be, and please redirect me if you feel differently or I'm misrepresenting anything, but it seems like everyone should come to you, like every single company that's possibly considering being a DAO should come to you first, get the basic package, if you will, get out there, protect themselves for the fundraise. Because then as they fundraise, they very well could and may want to, or may even have to, in order to fulfill the obligations of their white paper, add all the extra lawyers and analysis and adjust their bylaws and their operating agreements. But in the interim, before you even raise funds or at least liquidate the funds that you've raised, it sounds to me like you should start simple with you or someone like you in the future, I guess. And then at least have that baseline there before you start bringing in $1.5 million and then have $1 million for lawyers. Well, at that point in time, you've already got an issue. Am I misspeaking?
No, you're right. And what I would say is that unfortunately, we're not as cheap as LegalZoom. And often, jurisdictions outside of the U.S. are going to be a little bit more expensive because we know there's a premium value not having your jurisdiction be, Wyoming or Vermont or whatever in the U.S. for most people, especially around the world. And also our costs are not, nearly as low. We haven't been able to get our efficiency to the level of a LegalZoom yet. So I'll tell you honestly, the cheapest option is going to be, whatever jurisdiction you're in. I'm in the United States, so let's just use the U.S. The cheapest option for you is going to be going to LegalZoom.com and creating an LLC that is not going to necessarily be very DAO friendly, but maybe it's good enough at first. If really you can only afford a couple $100s. Our fees are going to be more like mid single digit ETH. So like 2 to 3 ETH right now is what we're looking at. And we are thinking about how we may be able to make that cheaper up front for people that truly are at the startup stage. And maybe we can have multiple options so that we only charge full prices to people who can afford it. So a lot of it's going to come down to whether you do already have some funding that you can spend on this, or whether you really need to just find the cheapest option available. And if you need the cheapest option available, it's not us, but it's still much better than nothing. And I think by the time you really want to hand over your governance to smart contracts, and you need to know that your legal entity is 100% absolutely tied to what the community decides. Right. And that's probably because you do have tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of crypto in there, so that people want to be sure. Right. Then you come to us and you spend a few ETH, to do it in the Marshall Islands. And by the way, that's a much lower price than if you tried to go to like British Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands and Panama and other areas that are not DAO friendly. That's the other issue, but people use them a lot for crypto related projects, for tax related reasons, and in those jurisdictions you're going to end up paying over $100,000, generally at a minimum. So we're kind of like the stepping stone price level, I would say. Unfortunately, not the cheapest.
Well, hey, Adam, on that note, that's not really that expensive. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like in the grand scheme of things, for the value that you're providing, for the solution you are providing, knowing that of course you have to start somewhere, and yes, after you've done this 1,000 times or 10,000 times, etc. Like anything, the Model 3 costs a lot less than the Model S did. It starts somewhere.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme, like you're getting on the podcast chat here, in the grand scheme, like that's really not a lot, especially if you've got any project worth its salt, you're going to be raising, at least, if not tens, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. I think it's worth it.
Sure, it's not very much in legal speak.
No.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. All things compared.
Totally. And I think like a lot of people in crypto, I believe in the value that we can bring to even people for whom, a few ETH, it really is a lot. And that's why maybe I bring up, that in a perfect world, it would be even less. But you're right. For most organizations, especially organizations with a lot of people involved, it's not going to be prohibitively expensive.
Well, it seems like both of our organizations are trying to make a better world, so we'll get there soon enough. So, Adam, I have a question about a little bit of a follow-up about the Marshall Islands. So, if an organization decides that they're going to create a DAO in the Marshall Islands, does that mean that you have to have a physical location in the Marshall Islands?
So that's what we do for you. So we have an office in the Marshall Islands, and you get to use that address as your registered agent office, is what it's called. And that takes care of the only requirement related to being in the Marshall Islands. So you don't have to actually have an office, or you don't have to open a bank account. You don't have to do anything else in the Marshall Islands aside from just working with us.
Okay. If there's any possibility we can redo that answer in case my wife is listening, and then we can go to our Marshall Islands office. I'm just kidding. She loves the beach, so she wouldn't have any problems. Since we're talking about the Marshall Islands, and the First Nation that it would appear has come out and said, hey, we like this DAO, we like the structure of it, and we want to give it this kind of a legal status. What country do you see potentially on the horizon, the next domino to fall, so to speak?
Sure. So, first of all, I have to admit that there is another country, actually. Well, it's a state in the United States. Wyoming has passed a law that achieves some of the same things that our Marshall Islands legislation does. And really, the primary disadvantage to most people I talk to is that it's in the United States. And people don't like that, both because it increases the likelihood of falling under US-related regulations like the SEC, and because of the unknown of maybe the federal government coming in and overriding what Wyoming has done with its own crypto-related legislation. Mm-hmm. But Wyoming is there too, and so I got to give them props for that. The only other thing I've heard rumblings about, but I wouldn't want to be too specific, is Australia. I've heard from a couple people that they are working on a new legislation that would be favorable to crypto and probably DAOs, but that's all I know. It's just rumors. So those are the only things that I'm aware of.
Interesting. So, bringing up Wyoming, one of the big differences that we see, or that we've, through a little research that we've understood, is that Wyoming requires a true majority vote of all coin holders, correct? So they would require a 51% vote on something. That's how you understand it?
Yeah, we actually got in touch with the Secretary of State's office in Wyoming to confirm that, because it was a little bit confusing from the law itself. Mm-hmm. And they indeed confirmed that you need a majority of membership voting for a vote to be considered valid. And yeah, as you're probably intimating, for most DAOs, getting 50% of your eligible, voters voting is just not practical. And it's not what you want. People may have heard of the idea of holographic consensus, which sounds pretty advanced, but the point is just that usually it's just 5 or 10% of people who either have the knowledge related to a particular proposal that's relevant or are involved in it in some way, or, for whatever reason, they're the only people you really need voting. And then, if there's something that becomes very contentious or affects the whole organization or is a huge spend, then maybe you want 30, 40, 50% or more of the organization voting. But most of the time, 5 or 10% is actually totally fine. And so, yeah, that would be a problem with the Wyoming legislation.
And where, in your experience with DAOs, what percentage do you see a DAO typically being able to generate in percentage of votes?
So an example that I like to point to as a very successful DAO is called DXDAO. And DXDAO has a lot of money in the treasury, something like $100 million. And they've developed a number of successful dApps, DeFi and related dApps. So it's a very kind of high functioning DAO with a lot of contributors, very well organized, also a lot of fun. I'm a member myself and encourage people to come check out the Discord. And they usually get 5 or 10% of people voting on most proposals, and that works for them.
Okay, interesting. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a direct question out of the podcast chat, Adam.
Nice.
At this
Do it.
point, thinking about the pre-sale now, right? Because that's the position that our community is up against, is we're getting ready to go to a pre-sale. Does it make sense as a community for us to potentially slow down, pump the brakes just a little bit, register as a DAO or an LLC first before we even launch into the pre-sale?
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, but yes. Yeah, you should do something, and whether it's with us or in a different jurisdiction, you should do something. And there's even like I'm not being a great salesperson here, but there's even like solutions that are not as good as legal entities, but better than nothing. Like you may have heard of a unincorporated association, where you would basically create a set of contracts that everyone would be agreeing to that state that you're part of an organization. Your purpose is to share liability, not have unlimited liability, right? You take on corporate personhood by your own right under a certain name. And that can be better than nothing. Sometimes it can be effective in court. But yeah, in a perfect world, if you can afford it, you should do a MyDAO, DAO LLC, or some other legal entity solution. Yeah, before you move forward.
So were you basically throwing up there as a possibility, a kind of an off of the record agreement, like where you put it up and everybody agrees to that?
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
Okay.
And
Okay.
what I've even read lawyers say is if you don't have anything like at least some kind of document that everyone's agreeing to, and you end up in court about something, they'll actually go into Discord and read your welcome channel and your read first channel and your rules channel and say what, or even your other channels where you're just talking about business, and say, was there something they said that we could use as kind of like the rules of the road for this organization as we adjudicate this dispute. So, unless you write something, that's what people will fall back on. And
Yeah.
so again, ideally with a real legal entity like a MyDAO, DAO LLC, it's just very cut and dry. Like you know exactly what the entity is, you know exactly what it does, how it makes decisions. You have guaranteed, I shouldn't say guaranteed liability protection, but you have, liability protection from a sovereign nation, right, or a state in the United States. And so that's the strongest solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Very, very informative. So, and us, like our listeners in here, we're all at different levels of education. So these answers are really informative to us to help us move along as a community. Corey intimated in the beginning that, we are right now, we would be kind of listed as founders, but we really view ourselves more as initiators, right? Because this already is not our community. This is our community in total with everybody that's involved with us. So really like those answers. It's really, really informative. It gives us a lot as a community to consider as we move forward.
That's awesome. And what I could imagine could be a really good solution for you guys if you did a MyDAO DAO LLC is you can have a concept of the membership, which technically has all the power, and a group of managing members who are the people who are authorized to act on behalf of the organization. So they're the people, for example, who actually could sign a contract on behalf of the organization or open a bank account, or speak on behalf of the organization officially in some matter. And so what you could do is you could have maybe the founding team or a group of elected people be the managing members. But that doesn't give them the right to overrule a vote or veto anything. It's just saying those are the ones who are kind of speaking on behalf of the organization. So maybe something like that makes the most sense for your organization. But again, you can get very creative and you can organize things however you like.
Yeah, very interesting. Corey, what you got on your mind for a question?
Oh gosh, so many. But the obvious one that's like just hit me is, what's the turnaround time on all this, Adam? Like if we went, okay, maybe we should, how long until we are?
So unfortunately, it's 2 to 3 weeks, which feels like a long time in crypto world. We can try to do it faster, but there's a bit of back and forth. So like, for example, coming up with that operating agreement, we have to submit it to the government along with your application to become an LLC. And that's going to take a little bit of back and forth where, we'd want to understand what type of decision-making structure you want in place. If there are any smart contracts involved, right, we draft it, we send it to you, we need to wait for you to send it back. So the whole process does take a few weeks, unfortunately.
Well, a few weeks in the grand scheme of what we are building to last centuries. I mean, that's its intended purpose. I mean, what's a few weeks?
Yeah, good point. It's hard to act that way, but you're right. That's the right approach.
Well, and something else that I picked up on there is that in a DAO, without that kind of that legal personhood and that legal protection, that all members of the DAO, all coin holders share an equal liability. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this is definitely some good food for thought for our community. This is going to be some stuff that we will hash out together and ponder on and strategize for our next decisions. You've found yourself in a room with a lot of great people, Adam, and we've got folks from all over the world that are really engaged in this conversation and are a real pleasure to go through this with. So
awesome. Well, I love talking about it, and I love learning more about what you guys are up to, and obviously happy to come back anytime to chat with you, chat with the community, and help any way I can.
Yeah. Well, you're always welcome to come back into this channel. This is your channel because you are part of humanity. So always feel welcome here. So I have one kind of maybe not really off-topic question, but one question is, what businesses or industry do you see that would have the greatest potential for growth after becoming a DAO? Like if they were to say, we're going to move in the direction of a DAO, which industries do you see being able to take advantage of that and have a real spurt of growth?
I think it's social good organizations and communities generally. So I'm not sure if your goal is to go build a better widget. Maybe a DAO makes sense for you, but maybe not. Maybe just start a company and go do it the traditional way. And if your product is crypto related, it makes more sense to be a DAO. But I think where I'm seeing the most excitement and engagement around DAOs is community-driven projects, right? Mm-hmm. Where they're either mission-driven or part of the reason for being for the organization is to develop and maintain and engage a community of people that want to be together and do stuff together, right? Be together digitally at least and do stuff together. And if you're all technically reporting to a CEO or a board. That's a lot less fun than if you're all sharing governance, even if governance doesn't come up very often, right? It's not that often you have to make a decision about your treasury. But, for a lot of communities, you probably just wouldn't show up. You wouldn't be there if you were working for someone, right? You're doing it because you want to be an equal part of the movement, right?
Yeah.
So projects like yours, if I understand it right, where part of the reason for being is to drive community engagement and do something together.
Yeah.
And then there's no shortage of those types of situations for human beings, right? All of us, if you think about not just the company we work for, but all of the groups and clubs and organizations and associations and communities, teams that we're on, right? I'd say each person is on dozens of things that each of those maybe would make sense as a DAO, even if not the company you work for, 9 to 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. You said social platforms. We've got a couple guys in here this evening. Manifest King Apogee, Crypto and Caviar. These guys are also a part of a group called Clapper, or a social media platform called Clapper, that is in the process now of switching themselves over to a DAO. And really interesting. It's a pretty big DAO. They got a lot going on, but really interesting. And I'm glad to see that there is at least some social media platforms out there that are looking at this as their future. So, Corey, do you have any other follow-up questions? And I don't know if we should. I don't know if we should discuss. We're coming up on an hour. Adam, I don't know what your schedule is like. I don't know if you need to bounce out of here. If we want to extend our time a little bit and hit some more questions out of podcast chat.
I'm good to keep going.
Okay.
Well, that's beautiful, because if I've ever wanted to go past an hour, it'd be right now.
That's awesome.
So being mindful of that. So there's a couple different statements to make, and then a question for you, Adam. So a couple different statements is, for those who are unfamiliar with our white paper, the type of communities that you describe being most beneficial becoming a DAO, or the types of communities we plan to leverage to find, fund, and fix human challenging problems. And it's interesting to hear you describe almost exactly the kinds of communities kinds of projects, and the way that they be organized, that we imagine we're going to go out and find and give them the resources necessary to go out and change the world. And one of the things that we know we're going to have to do is the same thing that we're doing for ourselves, is help them understand how to structure their communities, and not just in a way where they interact, but also in the legal world as well, too, because we have to get out there and physically bank and be insurable and so on and so forth, be able to protect themselves in court if need be, and provide health insurance and benefits and things like that. There are things in the physical world that we want to be able to, whatever we are and whatever they are, to be able to provide those. I've got my really strong question whenever we're about to close this out that I want to ask you, but in between here and there, if we've got a few extra minutes, Adam, how do you go from where this is at and then get into traditional banking, insurance, assets? Like, is it the exact same after that point? Like, once you are an LLC in the Marshall Islands, otherwise, all things considered, the DAO can interact the same way that any other corporation would, or there's still limitations for what that DAO LLC could do that other corporations might be able to do for their, let's say, employees?
It's a great question. And technically, this LLC is just like any other LLC formed in the Marshall Islands or anywhere else. If you go to sign up for a bank account or anything that requires your corporate personhood, they won't even know that you're a DAO until you tell them. Or they find out because maybe they ask you a question like, well, who's the treasurer? And at that point, you're going to have to tell them, either you have to tell them we don't have a treasurer, or update your operating agreement and elect a treasurer and define what that really means. But it's that back and forth process. So, like, for example, one of our DAOs is setting up a bank account with Signature Bank in New York City, who is excited to have DAOs as clients. And when you set up a bank account, especially with an entity that's foreign to the US, have to go through a lot of KYC, AML, CFT. So for people who might not know, that's know your customer, anti-money laundering, and countering the financing of terrorism. It's a bunch of stuff that requires you to heavily dox yourself. And the people who are in charge of, I think I heard a growl about that, but
That sounds
yeah,
like
heavily
fun.
dox. Yeah. So I mean, I'm talking about like not even just like your name and address and phone number, social security number, birthday, but like resume, source of wealth, copies of your passport and bank statements and all this stuff. Because the bank wants to know that they're dealing with an above board organization. And so, you still have to go through all that stuff, even though maybe the Marshall Islands isn't going to require you to do that. And my DAO is not going to require you to do that because we know that DAOs don't always want to go through like quite that extensive of a doxing process for everyone. But if you're going to open a bank account, you do have to. So it really comes down to the specifics of each situation and what the requirements are of the institution that you're trying to interact with, and whether those requirements might force you to or ask you to compromise in some way on what would otherwise be your structure or your approach to doxing or whatever it is.
So I think it's fair to say that at some point in time, there's probably going to be an ecosystem that surrounds you and us, people that are DAO friendly, if there isn't already.
Yeah.
Starting
Good
to
point. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of people. I don't know if you guys were at ETH Denver last month, which was just a big crypto conference, one of the big kind of original crypto conferences. And it felt like, and I wasn't the only person who had this perception, it felt like everyone there was either starting a DAO or trying to offer something to DAOs. And I really think that's what's happening in crypto and even beyond crypto. I mean, most of the people I talk to day to day, they're not crypto people. They're people who, they're in some business or they have some social good they're going after and they've heard about crypto, they've heard about DAOs, and they want to see if they can use that tool. But yeah, it seems like everyone's trying to get involved with DAOs in some way. And so I do think over the next year, we'll see a lot of service providers like ourselves, pop up and also find ways to work together and act like an ecosystem. So yeah, I do see that.
Yeah. Do you see any on the horizon potential hurdles or challenges for DAOs, immediately ahead? Or maybe let me can I reframe that question?
Yeah.
Do you
of course.
okay? Do you see in the coming
There's lots.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
go ahead.
do you see pushback coming from governments on DAOs?
No, I don't see that. I
Okay.
don't see that. And in fact, I read all of President Biden's executive order in the United States about cryptocurrencies, which was pretty long. For anyone else who read it knows that it didn't mention DAOs or even the word governance once in that whole document. So even with the United States, the executive branch announcing what is being hailed as like a landmark moment in crypto regulation, even though it's really just a first step. It didn't mention DAOs or governance. So I think we're still pretty early
Yeah.
in this part of crypto, and so it might be a little while until a lot of governments and regulators really start trying to get involved here.
Yeah. Interesting. Good. Corey, what you got next?
Oh, ultimately, to kind of tie on and close out my thoughts on the one aspect of things, do you envision in the near future the ability to provide, based off of what you're seeing in the near future? In the long run, I think we're all in agreement that that'll happen, but do you see the ability to offer health insurance and life insurance and have a traditional payroll company, or be able to kind of transfer over into fiat and use existing structures, banking? Do you feel like there's going to be, in the short run, like let's say 12 to 18 months, the ability to snap your fingers and adapt into that world? Or do you feel like that timeline is going to be more like 5 to 10 years or somewhere in between, to where that like true marriage has happened?
No, I think 2022 is the year of the DAO. We already almost a quarter of the way through the year, and it has been exciting already. But I think a lot more is still going to happen this year, and I do think part of that is going to be service providers that try to connect, these like traditional world TradFi type of services and make them things that DAOs can either engage in or do something similar. And I think what you brought up, health insurance, is a great example, at least in the United States, where companies are usually provide health insurance for their employees. So I do think we're going to see that this year, but that doesn't mean it'll necessarily get really big this year or ever. And the reason I say maybe not even ever is, I think about something as simple as payment processing. So far, we only accept payment in ETH or stablecoins, but we only accept payment on Ethereum because it's really freaking easy, and we're in crypto. And actually, to be able to accept fiat, I'm going to have to go through all kinds of like hoops and challenges and paperwork and all this stuff. So I guess my hope and my vision is that we find ways of achieving, like solving the same problems, but without having to use the traditional rails. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think we will see these companies pop up that offer these like traditional services, but I don't think they're going to blow up because I think people are going to try to find ways not to have to use them if they don't have to.
Well, to that point, I would agree with you, Adam, and also furthermore say that whenever I think of the marriage, I think about all of those companies paying for health insurance in ETH, having a DeFi platform that allows you to get insurance in that, a payroll platform that allows you to get paid in crypto.
And
to
that's
be able to choose your crypto at your paycheck time.
and that's got to be coming, right? Because Goldman Sachs, that was a news story that we bounced over and we didn't get to today. But Goldman Sachs just took their first counter sale of cryptos, right? They just made the first kind of transaction like that. So I do see that as this space grows, and there is a need, the insurance companies, all of them will adjust to take these kind of payments for their services rendered. So I think that it's going to come in very short time. So, but it seems like there would be a bit of a way through an LLC to go ahead and acquire some of that kind of underneath the DAO or over top of the DAO, however you look at it. It seems like there would be an avenue for both, even at the current time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's maybe a stopgap, right? Is using some like TradFi type services for our DAOs, but that eventually TradFi are the ones who are going to be using crypto rails for everything in the future, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So Corey, I know that you have you had a question you wanted to ask as we're wrapping up. I could stay on here, and I know Corey myself could stay on here and talk for hours, but I try not to go too long. But
well, I think that what we need to do clearly is have you back, Adam, and I think perhaps this next time around, because there's so much to talk about as we just continue on this journey of getting anyone who's listening to this, no matter what level that they're at, slowly to the other side where they can understand the importance. And also, it starts with the understanding why it's meaningful, and then from there, understanding what to do next. So we can just continue that journey of getting people from understanding that's relevant to taking action. And speaking of taking action, if I would, Adam, I'm going to throw you a question here because I think, Phil, you're giving me the round out question. Adam, I know you talked about a lot. That was your mission, purpose, but to really ask it as best one can surmise from your side, thinking about it on the spot.
Bring it on.
What if you could change the world doing what you're doing? What are you trying to change, and what's going to get into? What do you think might be the obstacle to get there, and what would you need in order to get to that outcome?
Wow. I love it. Well, I mean, DAOs are the answer, and maybe what a DAO looks like today is what it's going to look like in the future. I like when people talk about how in the early days of television, people were just doing radio shows on TV, right? They were sitting around talking into a microphone, and people liked it, and that was the beginning of TV. But eventually people figured out how to make TV shows. And I think the same thing is happening now with DAOs. Like we have this whole new platform or set of capabilities really that you could bring to bear on an organization or a company or an association or whatever. And right now we're just kind of using the stuff we already know about in a different way. Like voting's not new. You could count votes on paper, and that's what a lot of corporations do today. And now we're just doing voting on the blockchain, and maybe we're doing different types of hierarchies. So in the long run, I really think people are going to use what we're thinking about as DAOs today, everything from high school chess clubs, right, up to literally governments, national and international governments, and literally everything in between, right? Companies, sub-governments, again, associations, charities, right? All of these things, when you're starting them especially, and when you're running them, you're going to ask yourself, like, is one of these new capabilities that came from crypto, that came from the DAO world, useful to us in some way? And if so, let's leverage that capability in some way, even a small feature that you're adding to the way you run your organization, or you're automating something small related to treasury or governance that used to be a manual process, and now your business is more efficient, right? These capabilities that we're trying to innovate on, and they're going to find their way into almost every situation that involves people and resources, which I think is pretty much every situation. And so that's what's so exciting. And I mean, in terms of, my role and like what I would need to remove the obstacles, I think, I think come to terms as I've gotten a little bit older with the idea that, like, I don't personally have to change everything. Like, I can do my part, and all of us can do our parts, and something amazing and maybe emergent is happening as a result. So I just want to feel like I am, doing my best, making my contributions to what's happening with DAOs. And right now that's my DAO. Maybe one day it'll be something else. And that eventually these capabilities that we're innovating on together, and that are really kind of emergent, and no one person will develop on their own, will potentially change everything. And in terms of obstacles, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I mean, I guess if you could do anything for me, I'd say make it so I could sleep half as long and have just as much energy, and then I could 50% more.
It's a man after my own heart.
Yeah, it's like, unfortunately I need my sleep. And I think there's something beautiful and maybe spiritual about sleep, and that's fine. I don't need to get around it, but yeah, it's just that kind of thing. Like, if you could make me superhuman, make me superhuman, but in the meantime, I just want to do.
Well, we have the technology, so I guess we might as well get together, turn you into a cyborg.
There you go. I mean, really, I want to get a little bit philosophical for a second, because I think what has been happening with humanity and our technology over the last several decades is we are evolving as a, right? Like, we're not just human anymore. We're like humanity plus like this integrated technology of the internet and our phones, and we really are collectively a different species in some ways from what we were 50 or 100 years ago. And if you think about what makes that true, is the way we interact with each other and our resources, and the way we use computers and the internet to do it. And so what we're developing with DAOs, we really are helping humanity continue to evolve towards something bigger and better. So in some ways,
So that said, Phil, do you mind if I take that one? Because I feel like I want to tie on to what Adam said.
Yeah, jump
there.
in.
So Adam, you still there? You kind of cut real quick.
Oh, no. Yeah, I am here.
But so on that note, I'm going to try to make this real fast because we're already over time. To get philosophical, you are in the right place. So on that note, speaking for myself and probably some others in the community, but to speak just for myself, I look at groups of people like their own entities. And if you look at that historically speaking over time, you think about what a group of people, maybe a small tribe, 10, 15 people, what they were capable of as one group. And then you start extrapolating that over time, and you see the outcomes of how they interact with each other and how each person inside of that community has their own roles inside the community, and how that evolves and how that specializes, and how, as they specialized, it adapted technology, it adapted, what was possible, adapted, larger and larger communities and larger groups, because they're able to advance through specialization, have extra resources, be able to provide better quality of living. And if you start looking at humanity in that way, and you start looking at what a DAO is, our purpose as a human race, as I see, is to find the thing that we are the most beautiful, the most capable, the most interested, the most valuable at, and to specialize in that one thing. And over time, it started historically that maybe you spent 0.001% on that thing. And then it went to 1% on that thing, and then 10% on that thing. In my opinion, with DAOs, if executed to their fullest potential, we could have communities that are able to contribute and own the things for which they can specialize to the highest level and degree, to be able to innovate at scales unseen before. Because you can now track individual contributions on only highly specialized things, so you don't have to spend 90% of your existence doing the other things that allow you to get into the position to do the 10% of things. You don't have to show up to the office for 8 hours to do the 30 minutes of actual work. And whenever we start extrapolating what that means to humanity over the course of time, especially as you advance technology, I think that DAOs are going to multiply the speed at which we advance many orders of magnitude if they're fully adopted. So that said, Adam, you feel like that seconds your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, it makes me think about, I'll just give the one like devil's advocate, like partial point, which is, maybe being completely specialized wouldn't be as fun in some cases. I want to specialize on DAOs, and I still want to play ice hockey on the side, right? I'm not a great ice hockey player, and I don't think you're arguing that we shouldn't have hobbies too.
Yeah.
It sounds a little bit scary in that regard, but I completely agree with you that maybe that's the nature of DAOs that we really need to explore that we haven't yet. We figured out treasury and corporate governance, but we haven't figured out how do you actually allow people to collaborate much more effectively day to day in the stuff they're actually working on. Part of which probably is exactly what you're describing, which is how do you get that has got to be a good word for micro contract, micro 1099 economy, right? Where it's not even a 1099, because that would be prohibitively expensive. It's just swing in here and do this thing real quick because you're really good at it, and you'll get your tokens and you can go move on to the the next DAO that needs it. So I definitely agree that that's a big opportunity.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, crypto does allow for that once that problem gets solved, where you can contribute to something, your contributions are tracked in a way that's immutable, and you can receive rewards based off of the way a smart contract is written without a governing body necessarily needing to individually micromanage that transaction, which allows for perpetual, or whether it's a short term, like a one-to-one contribution reward, or whether or not it's a perpetual reward over maybe perpetuity, forever. And as we solve that problem, I think ultimately an equation that I created for innovation is that you have to have property rights. So people they feel confident that they can contribute to something, and that whatever store of wealth they receive in return is going to be just for their contributions. You have to have obviously incentive, but so if you have to have collaboration, because if you can only do what it is that you're capable of doing, you can only build such a good log cabin up in the mountains if you have to chop all your own wood and put together all the parts. But if you have the incentive, you have the ability to collaborate with millions or tens of millions of people across the globe towards a shared goal where you can all have strong property rights and solve that problem where everybody gets their microtransactions or perpetual transactions. Think what'll happen to innovation then.
Yep, that's awesome. I love it. But by the way, I'm going to put a link in the chat to a video, and I guess I should say, since it's a podcast as well, from DAO Denver. There was a talk by Mark Lurie of Shipyard Software called The Evolution of DAOs. And he starts with like the beginning of humans like collaborating and how it evolved through like into like religion and with the press and with limited liability company, and the Dutch East Indies company, all this stuff, and kind of ties it all together and ties in how DAOs fit into it. So that could be a cool thing for everyone to check out.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
We'll definitely check that out for sure. So, Adam, we would love to extend the invitation for you to come back and to have some more follow-up conversations. We are going to, the way we work here at the DOI Foundation is we are going to take basically the information that you've shared with us. We are going to go back and have a conversation with the community and let everybody take their new educated approach. And then we're going to have some more conversations, and then we'll go to the next step and the next step. And we would love to be able to share those with you and for you to come along that journey with us. You've been very informative, and we sure do enjoy having you here with us tonight.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. So I'm happy to come back anytime and help any way I can. So thank you so much.
Very good. Corey, do you have anything that you would like to follow up with? And might I ask, Corey, do we want to hang out for a few minutes after we get done talking to Adam and talk in the community for a few minutes? Or do we want to follow this up with another talk tomorrow? How do we want to go about that?
Yeah, I'd say what we should do is go ahead and have the podcast tomorrow morning, which I think is actually on the events calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And we're already 20 minutes over schedule. I think it was a very appropriately used 20 minutes. But
Yeah,
to
definitely.
that end, there's so much more to talk about. I think in my mind, the next time that we have another one of these interviews, which I think we should go ahead and schedule before too long, is we round out some more of the holes in the education that we just couldn't fit with time.
Yeah.
And then we start talking about how to streamline and simplify implementation, not just for our community, which I think we got some part of that, but for other communities that are considering incorporating as a DAO. So that way they have a very clear path, A, B, C, D, by the time they listen to that second recorded podcast.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And Adam, some of these people in here will probably vouch for me, not just since we have the King of DAOs on the phone this evening. I have said many times that my personal thought is that it will be amazing if the DOI community ends up being DAO builders, right? And helping other entities come over into this space, because we definitely see the value in it, for not just for the community, but for each individual player in the community to really have a say. So, well, I guess with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap it up here this evening. Adam, we appreciate you coming in. It has been a great interview. So, gang, for myself, Phil Ward, for Corey Fico, and for Adam Miller, we thank you guys for coming in, and have a fantastic evening. We will see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.